Wouldn't you say things have been really topsy-turvy in these past few days? Again, our neighbors to the south are mired in all kinds of racial difficulties after a policeman shot a black man in the back. California and the West are dealing with wildfires, while the poor South is once again dealing with the devastating hurricane. People were struggling to cope with all the fallouts of COVID-19. Now all these other troubles are upon them as well. So many are going hungry or worried losing homes. In the meantime, no politicians in their right mind are talking about how to help these people who are at the edge. They are too busy trying to gain power in the upcoming election. On our side of the border, things appear not as bad, but we too are full of worries and concerns. Parents worry about what will happen when school opens. Many are still worried about not being able to pay rents or finding jobs. Teenagers in Toronto were arrested for shooting guns into a restaurant. Addiction issues are rising everywhere during this lockdown. In these difficult times, we can certainly use good news. Everyone enjoys videos of children or baby animals enjoying the world. You can see how people share stories that warms the hearts. A good news, however small, makes us feel better instantly. It is no wonder that at the end of each broadcast news, they include a story that cheers souls up. On Friday's CBC National on TV, they ended the newscast with a story of seniors in Calgary who decided to walk in this COVID lockdown the equivalent distance of Canada from East Coast to the West Coast. Many residents in that home did it together. A real departure from the news stories filled with killings, fightings, and arguing people. So I have been thinking about how is it that when people are seeking even the smallest of small good news to survive this difficult time, the good news of salvation in and through Jesus Christ is not being one of those stories. Why do people not pay any attention to Christians who are bearers of good news? It is important for us to figure out why this is the case. Somehow, people shrink away from anyone who identifies as Christian in today's world. At best, people attempt to ignore or change the subject to something different than anything that is linked to the good news of Christ. Reality is jarring because in today's world, ordinary people who are not Christians do not consider what we tell them as good news. At best, they think of us as the morality police who see them as morally fallen and never stop telling them that they are sinners. Where did they get such ideas about us? We may not think of it until we realize that televangelists and many famous preachers are constantly reminding the world how sinful they are. They are bombarded with eternal judgments and condemnation unless they turn away and become Christians. That is, in order to convert these hell-bound people, Christians are not hesitating to make a point about the moral failures. It is like trying to teach children to do better by constantly criticizing everything they do without any building up. Like children, they simply tune us out as soon as we remind them of sins. These preachers also think that it is important to let people know what they're doing wrong. We agree. However, constant barrage of criticisms leads more to people shutting us out than involving us in conversation. To think of it, Christians are master critics. If we pay attention carefully to what we say, we can hear ourselves always explaining moral failures, lack of faith, wishy-washy strength of unwilling people, people's unwillingness to hear or speak the truth, and constantly complaining about the world that falls short before God. In our world today, even the Christians do not like people criticizing and complaining non-stop. Why then do we think we will get hearing when we criticize and complain about the people of the world? They have stopped listening to Christians long ago. They only hear criticisms and complaints. No matter what we say, every word is heard in this context. The good news is not something they hear. This morning's passage has been used by preachers to point out why we have to live ethically by loving neighbors. Loving God is tied to simple actions that we can do every day. Sharing food and water with the hungry and thirsty, clothes with the poor, welcoming the stranger, visiting the sick and the prisoners. In these mundane and insignificant activities, love of God is displayed. In an attempt to bring this good news, preachers throughout history, including today's preachers, are shouting in their pulpits about the failures of people in giving food to the hungry, clothing the naked, and so on. That is, as preachers and Christians pour out warnings about the future, only thing the people hear are complaints and criticisms. They hear Christians fear-mongering. They hear Christians forcing our morality down their throats. How then do we change our ways of sharing the good news of Christ? What can we do so that the good news is heard when we share it? People need to know sin. People ought to hear the good news through the stories of Christ. Nearly decades ago, I was walking through a city street. There was a preacher shouting condemnation of the world. While he was preaching how terribly sinful we were, mind you, he did not know anyone who was passing by him. His sidekick was handing out small Bible pamphlets. By the time he and his sidekick left, the street was covered with littered papers. People simply threw the paper onto the street after being forced to take them. I remembered this incident when I saw a street preacher on Clifton Hill as countless number of people were passing by last summer. He was shouting. No one was listening and paying any attention. As people went in and out of restaurants, souvenir shops, and other carnivalesque establishments, no one gave one look at this preacher. He was invisible and unseen. His condemnation fell flat on the street. About 25 years ago, I was passing by a store in a mall. It was a computer store. People were so thick in front of the door, reaching for things that the store was giving away all free. They were giving away a CD. I asked the person who had one what it was about. The CD was nothing more than a software that would allow anyone with a computer and modem to connect free of charge to the internet. In those days, such software prices were about $50. The internet was just about being popularized. Everyone wanted to try it out. No one threw that CD on the floor or anywhere near the mall. Everyone took it home. Shouting judgment at people you want to share good news with no longer works. People do not pay attention no matter how we use today's passage to warn them about the eternal damnation. Complaining how people commit sins without care or criticizing for faulting people for ethical failures is no longer opening opportunities to share the good news. On the other hand, if we live a life of ethical and moral integrity, loving others as we love ourselves, those who search for good news will find us. History is full of stories where people went in search of true Christians to get a glimpse of what the life in Christ could be. In the early centuries, secular people flocked to deserts to search out Christian saints who gave everything up and lived contemplative life. In the medieval times, ordinary people flocked to churches where reformers were preaching against the corrupt church powers. During the Second World War, a French Protestant man named Roger began a small commune with few of his friends in the poorest region of France. Their goal was simply to live Christian life by being a place of refuge for children who were orphaned in the war. They still live this simple life. last summer. They were hosting over 5,000 young people each day. These young people came from all over the world to search for meaning in life. This Christian community never advertised nor told others about what they did. Somehow, young people found out about it and came out in droves. I was there in the 1980s. I heard it from a friend in a Lutheran church. It is still a going concern. All these young people who are thirsty for spiritual life find it. As we struggle about in our worries, there is a way for people to search out and find a place to receive the good news. We need to recover this quiet way of being a light of Christ in the darkness. People who search for it will find it. We need to move away from going out to shout judgments, complaining we are being ignored or persecuted. We need to rediscover being the pearl that so many people will search for, and when finding it, will sell everything to buy it. Yes, today's passage can be used as a tool of fear to make people look at their lives and take stock of who they are. However, such methods no longer reach people in meaningful ways. If we do, we and the churches become like a boy who cried wolf too many times. On the other hand, remember how people used to search out Mother Teresa in India. Also, think of young people flocking to Taizé in France, even today, to find authentic Christianity. The good news lived and preached through all that we do shine in darkness. In the world where people are searching for any small shred of good news, they will find us if we are the embodiment of that good news. Indeed, today's passage is a wonderful image of how in good news people can be saved in Christ. We do not need to use it to scare people with it, to insist what Christ's good news is like.